When we think about heart problems, our minds usually go to things like plumbing, right? Clogged arteries, maybe a faulty valve. But what if the issue isn't the plumbing at all? What if it's the pump itself? What happens when the actual muscle that powers every single beat of our lives starts to fail? That's the world of cardiomyopathy, and we're about to dive in.
So that's really the big question we're tackling here. We're going to explore this group of diseases called cardiomyopathy, where the heart muscle, the myocardium as it's known, is the real source of the trouble.
So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with a simple definition. Then we'll get into the three main types using some pretty helpful analogies: the overstretched heart, the overgrown heart, and the stiff heart. And then we'll wrap it all up with a side-by-side comparison to make sure it all clicks.
Okay, first things first. What exactly is cardiomyopathy? Well, at its very core, it's a disease of the myocardium, the heart muscle. So what does that really mean? It's a condition where the heart muscle gets sick. It might become weak, or too thick, or too stiff, and the end result is that it just can't do its main job, pumping blood as well as it should. It's not a problem with the fuel line, it's a fundamental problem with the engine itself. All right, let's jump into the most common type. We're calling it the overstretched heart, but the official name is dilated cardiomyopathy.
To get a handle on this one, I want you to picture a rubber band. If you stretch it out again and again and again, what happens? It gets all loose and floppy, right? It loses that snappy recoil. Well, that's a perfect way to think about what happens to the heart muscle in dilated cardiomyopathy.
So what are the consequences when the heart gets overstretched like that? Well, for starters, the heart chambers actually get bigger, or dilate, which makes the walls thin and weak. This leads to something called systolic dysfunction, which is just a fancy way of saying the heart has a pumping problem. It can't squeeze with enough force. This can also lead to things like irregular heartbeats or arrhythmias, and even blood clots forming inside the heart. So what causes this to happen? Well, the list is surprisingly long and varied. Sometimes it's in your genes. Other times, it's caused by things like inflammation of the heart, chronic alcohol abuse, or even the incredible stress of pregnancy. It can also be a side effect of other conditions, like hemochromatosis, which is basically an overload of iron in the body.
And right here, this is what it actually looks like under a microscope. You can see how the muscle fibers, instead of being thick and packed together, have become all thinned out and stretched apart. This is the reality behind that stretched rubber band idea, a heart muscle that has literally lost its power at the cellular level.
Okay, on to our second type, which is, well, it's kind of the exact opposite problem. We call this the overgrown heart, or hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Here, the issue isn't weakness, it's that the muscle has gotten way too thick.
Here's a great way to picture this one. Imagine you're in a room, and the walls start growing thicker and thicker and thicker, pushing inwards. Pretty soon, there's barely any space left inside the room. That's exactly what happens in the heart's main pumping chamber. The muscle gets so bulky that there's just not enough room for blood to even get in.
So the really crucial point here is that this is a filling problem, what doctors call diastolic dysfunction. The pump itself is super strong, overgrown even, but it can't relax and open up properly to let blood in. It's usually caused by genetic mutations, and if you look at a biopsy, you see something really key. The muscle fibers aren't just big, they're in total disarray, all jumbled up.
And this is where things get really, really serious, because this condition can go totally undetected. The massive strain it puts on the heart can trigger a fatal arrhythmia, especially during intense exercise. And that, tragically, is why it's a well-known cause of sudden cardiac death in young, otherwise healthy athletes. If we zoom in with the microscope again, you can see exactly what that disarray looks like. See that? Instead of nice, neat, parallel lines of muscle, the fibers are just running in every direction. It's a tangled mess. So it's not just bigger muscle, it's disorganized muscle. And that's what keeps the heart from working the way it should.
All right, let's move on to our third and final type, the stiff heart, or restrictive cardiomyopathy. With this one, the problem isn't that the muscle is too weak or too thick, it's that it's lost all its flexibility.
The heart muscle is supposed to be pliable. It needs to expand to let blood in. But in restrictive cardiomyopathy, it becomes rigid, totally unyielding. The best way to think about it, imagine trying to blow up a balloon that's made of concrete. It's just not going to happen. So just like the overgrown heart, this is another filling problem, diastolic dysfunction. The muscle's compliance, its ability to stretch, is practically gone. And since the heart can't fill up with blood properly, that blood has to go somewhere, so it backs up into the lungs and the rest of the body.
That's why this condition often shows up looking like classic congestive heart failure.
What makes the heart so stiff? Well, it's often caused by infiltration. That's when abnormal stuff gets deposited inside the heart muscle. A classic example is amyloidosis, where these abnormal proteins build up in the tissue and make it rigid. And interestingly, that iron overload condition we mentioned before, hemochromatosis, it can cause this stiff heart too.
On this last microscopic view, you can kind of see how that infiltration works. Imagine those amyloid proteins are like gunk, seeping into all the spaces between the muscle cells, basically cementing them in place. They can't move, they can't stretch. That's the reality of a stiff, concrete-like heart.
Okay, so we've looked at all three types, the overstretched, the overgrown, and the stiff. Now let's put them all side by side to really lock in the differences. This is where it all comes together.
You know, the biggest, most fundamental difference really boils down to one question. Is it a pumping problem or a filling problem? Dilated cardiomyopathy, the overstretched one, that's a pumping issue. The heart can't squeeze properly. But the other two, hypertrophic and restrictive, they're both filling issues. The heart is too thick or too stiff to relax and let blood in.
And this table just lays it all out perfectly. For dilated or overstretched, the main problem is enlarged, weak chambers, which messes up the pumping. For hypertrophic, the overgrown, you have a super thick wall, and that messes up the filling. And for restrictive, the stiff one, you've got a rigid wall, which also messes up the filling. Three very different problems, all happening to the same incredible muscle. So let's end with this thought. Our hearts work non-stop for us, day in and day out. We spend so much time talking about the plumbing, the arteries and cholesterol, but these hidden diseases are a powerful reminder that the health of the muscle itself is absolutely crucial. It really makes you wonder, how do we better protect the engine, not just the pipes?